Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session of Microsoft Zero to Hero. And this is another weekend, another Saturday, and we have another interesting topic to tackle. If you want to follow us, let me share my screen and go to microsofthero.com. There you could see where we are active, and we are part of also Microsoft Learn. This is a community built by community. You could follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and also join the Microsoft Learn Hub to follow the topics that we have. Also, if you go to the calendar, you could see the upcoming topics and the previous topics and links to the recordings. Watch them. And today we will have Davide with us that will tell us what to do when we get a notification or what should we have done before getting a notification. Let's invite him on the stage. Hi, Davide. How are you doing?
Ciao, ciao. I'm pretty fine. I'm pretty fine. Yeah. You are good?
Yeah, I'm good as well. Thanks for being with us and tell us more about what we should do about like alerting and all the notifications that we should get.
Yeah, it will be an interesting topic because it's something that we always underestimate, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And well, we will learn something that I did on a real project, and it opened my eyes on a problem that we all have, but we never care enough about. So,
Yeah,
how can we react to an emergency?
that
And
is really
well,
great. Then the stage is yours. Fingers crossed, and let's see.
First of all, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, today we will talk about how you use the some Azure components to act swiftly in case of an emergency. And let me first introduce myself with a couple of words. I'm Davide Bellone. I'm a principal backend developer from Turin, so northern Italy. Microsoft MVP. I'm one of the co-leaders of Torino.net, which is a community about .net and based on Torino. So again, northern Italy. You can find my content on my blog, codeforit.dev, in which I publish content about C Sharp.net, Azure, software architecture, well, stuff that a backend developer like me might enjoy. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Bellone Davide. And well, the most important part is that I'm a big board game nerd. So if you want to chat with me about board games or stuff like that, well, you know where to find me. And well, let's begin. And let's begin with a story. This is a story. It's a story of a trauma. And unfortunately, it's a real story. You know, a couple of of years ago, I was working in this big tech firm, and we were managing the application of one of the most important companies in Italy. We had to deal with a lot of data, and it was not easy. Also because the application was incredibly big, was massive, was huge. And we needed, of course, to process a lot of data without errors, without downtime. Everything was more or less working. Uh, yeah, it was not maybe the best application, but you know, it's the kind of legacy stuff that you have to deal with.
Mhm.
Christmas holidays were approaching, and I was actually already planning for go skiing and well taking a break. Fine, until exactly a couple of days before my vacation, everything started to fall apart, and the application started going offline for apparently no reason at all, and we couldn't really understand why. It was, like being in a sort of village where sometimes, at totally random times, a building bursts into flames. And the only thing that you could do in that moment is just to run and put out the fire. Of course, the client was furious, and our managers were furious. And well, guess who had to give up the vacation days just to restart the application every 5 minutes and see if it was offline? Yes, it was me. So yeah, it's a real trauma.
So you were a DBA, like default blame acceptor.
And all. So, well, when everything mm, goes down, what's the first thing that you do? You look at the logs. Easy? No, because at that time, logs were not easy to read, were definitely poorly architected, and therefore difficult and slow to query. And if you spend a lot of time trying to understand what your logs can do for you, how they are structured, it means that you're just wasting time that you could have used for fixing the problem. And well, we didn't want to spend days and days and nights refreshing the application to see, okay, it's still on. Good, I can sleep well.
Mm-hmm.
Not maybe the best vacation. We needed to have a way to get notified in case of errors. And we needed something automatic. And we needed a plan. And therefore, we came up with a plan, of course. The first thing was having good logs and having queries that were performant so that you can act swiftly. But we also wanted something more. Instead of just manually checking all the logs and performing the queries, we wanted something that checks the logs, checks what happens in the system, and in case something is going wrong, it notifies you, it triggers an event. We wanted, of course, alerts. And we wanted to configure what happens when an alert is fired. Clearly, we wanted to be notified as fast as possible and with all the information necessary to act promptly. It's not enough just to say, hey, the system is down. Okay, why is the system down? So we wanted something better. And one last thing. We needed a single place in which we could find all the most important queries and all the most important metrics, just to have a bird's eye view of the whole system without, that kind of weird situation where I have my logs and my colleagues are some queries that are good for him, and some are stored in some obscure wiki page, and somebody has shared a good query on the channel. No, let's have a centralized place where we have everything already ready to be executed, so that we could just open a single page and see if there is some sort of correlation between events. So yeah, we had a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not that difficult, honestly, to create it. We just needed to plan it carefully. And we needed to start with something, with the real basics of everything. So having good logs. And let's start this conference, this session, talking about what we used to do and what we should have done instead. So we can call them some sort of best practices for logging, but it's actually more something that saved our vacation. Let's say like this. Let's be polite. The first trick that we tried is not something that actually changes a lot once the system is already created. And maybe instead of using, that you have all the different libraries for logging, etc., it happened that we were using the specific logger inside the core of our application. So serilog.ilogger. Does it work? Yes, of course. But it has two main downsides. The first one is that you are using an external library that might be affected by some some issues. Maybe somebody tampers with the code and you are using something that is not that safe. And another thing is that using that specific logger of the library instead of the iLogger from Microsoft, Microsoft.extensions.logging, prevents you from experimenting. Because if you have the generic iLogger, you could say, okay, Serilog is fine for me. No, maybe I would use nlog because it allows me to have something better, or maybe log4net. Experimenting, finding what is best for you is a real power that we usually take for granted. And there is another thing that today Serilog is free. Serilog, just because this is the example, Serilog today is free. What happens if tomorrow they change the licensing? You will have to rework the whole application. So if you're starting from scratch, my suggestion is to use the generic iLogger rather than using the one from a specific vendor. But now let's move to something that is more specific to what saved our vacation. And one of the things was to use message templates. And this is something that I honestly rarely saw in the companies I've worked with. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because they don't know that they exist at all. But let's see what we should not do. The first example shows a message that might look fine, like user 123 added item ABC. It works. It's totally fine. But there is one fundamental problem with this approach. The point is that logging is not important for the message itself, but for the data associated to the log. And this is because once you have good metadata to query on, you can create good queries, you can create filtering, aggregation, and stuff like that.
So
and this is why these, sorry?
So using the structured logging gives us the capability to be able to query, for example, over user ID or item ID in this example that we're sharing. Okay.
Exactly. In fact, this message template allows you to create the template of the message. Of course, it's called like this for a reason. And once you create the log, the final result for you as a user is exactly the same. It's the same exact message, but you also have the possibility to query the property named user ID and item ID. And this is particularly important because in the other cases, so the string concatenation means that you have to parse every single line of log. And parsing is an expensive operation. So, of course, using something that allows you to access directly a key is totally better than parsing thousands of log rows just to find if that kind of problem exists. No, maybe we should use message template for this reason. And there is another reason, actually. Message templates are static, and therefore they can be cached. So logging systems like Application Insight can cache that kind of message template for performing better and faster queries. If you use the concatenated strings, we are actually generating totally different strings that cannot be cached. Of course, the string user ABC is different from the string user XYZ. You cannot cache them, but you can cache the message template for better querying. So this is incredibly important, and this really can affect how you query your system and how you perform your troubleshooting and how you can react in case of an emergency. One thing that I hated in a lot of companies is they lack the intentionality of using log levels. So everything is an information, everything is an error. And what I really hated, not in that specific company, but I saw it happen was to log information and then in the message say, this is a warning. Why? Message log levels exist for a reason. And if everything is information, then nothing is really important. If everything is an error, then how can we pinpoint real problems? Clear log levels allow you to create easier queries, better queries. And that's not just it. It allows you to understand the priorities of errors. Most of us, honestly, always use error for everything. It could be a warning, it could be critical. Is it always an error? Maybe we can just recover from that situation. Should we log it as an error? Or maybe it's just something that happened and we can overcome it. And another part is that different servers, different instances of your application, like production and development, can use different log levels, can store logs of different log levels. Like, for example, in production, I just want warning, error, and critical. But maybe in the development environment, I want everything. And maybe in production, in case of an incident, I want to reproduce it by enabling every log level so that I can be able to trace everything that happened during that operation from the trace level to the bug, information, warning, etc. So we can toy with log levels, but we have to do it with an intention. Then, do you remember when I mentioned message templates? Another stuff that I still see nowadays is that we concatenate to the log message also the exception message, maybe the exception type, the message, and the stack trace. Does it work? Yes, of course, but it has the same issues as we saw before. And there is another thing that is really important. Well, first of all, stack message is heavy. So if you have to parse a log message that contains a whole stack trace, well, of course, it takes some time. One last thing is that a good idea could be to have this other method overload, this one here, that accepts as a first parameter the exception itself. So it's the concrete object, it's the instance of the exception, so that we can actually query also the stack trace. We can query all the details of the exception without having us to, concatenate all the strings and try to understand what can be useful. We will see more on this later, because it's honestly something that not that many people know. One last thing that is not that obvious, honestly, is that we tend to add logs for everything. There's one big problem with this approach, is that logging is an operation that takes time, takes resources, and a log itself is some sort of content that has to be stored somewhere. So a log, even if it might look trivial, uses some resource time, uses some resources of your application, of your system, and occupies space on a storage. And storage is not always an infinite resource, and sometimes you have to pay for storage. So instead of logging everything that happens in all the operations, another good idea could be to say, okay, I know that this is an auth path that takes time and performs a lot of stuff. Maybe instead of logging everything that happened for every item, I just want a recap of the whole operation. Okay, I performed 5,000 elements, and the result was it went all good. This is honestly way better than logging 5,000 times the thing that, okay, this single operation went well. And again, this is something that you have to architect for. Another important part is that you can enable or disable specific logs based on the log level, even in this kind of operation, because, maybe in production, I want to generate logs only in case of an error or an exception. But if I define that this application can create logs of level debug, then I can add further log items. So you can toy with the log levels both on in the moment you generate them. So the application itself can decide to generate or not specific logs, and also the destination of your logs, like application insights, can decide, okay, no, I really don't care about logs of level information and debug. You can send them to me, but I will ignore them. You have these two places in which you can toy with logs. So finally, we reworked our logs. We were ready to do something more interesting, maybe. And, well, let's see a sort of example. As I mentioned, I'm a big board game nerd. And in fact, for this application, for this session, I created a simple application that is just a dashboard of the board games I own. And let's see how it works during this quick demo, because we will see the final result at the end of the application, of the session, sorry. So we are here in this whole board game dashboard. Oh, right now I have 99 board games. Oh, good. I missed one
You
for
need to
the...
tell us like which one you like the most at the end of the session.
I could. There is just one I'm really proud of. I don't know if you know, but Spencer and Terence Hill. I think that they are pretty famous in Europe. Well, I'm pretty happy with this game here. By the way, this is a simple application made in Razor that queries an external system that is called Board Game Geek, which is one of the most important websites for board gamers like me. And I can do a couple of stuff here, like, seeing all the games that I have, looking at the details as I did a couple of seconds ago. But I can also search for board games. Tell me one of your favorite board games. I know that you are into games as well.
Yeah, but not that much. I don't know. Let's go for Monopoly. Like the easy
Okay.
one. Not my favorite one, but
Okay, but it's fair. Let's see what happens. Okay, I can search for it. Maybe I have to restart the application. Sorry. Monopoly. Okay. It takes time. You find one that is not working.
okay.
You just had a spoiler on what I wanted. Let's try with Dixit. Okay, we have a couple of results, and let's try, again maybe with Risico. Risico. Let's search for Risico, and we will see those results, but it's taking some time. Let's search for it again. But we are pretty happy with this, because Risico, well, actually, even Monopoly, those are the two games that I really hate. And therefore, I said that whenever I search for Risico and for Monopoly, I created a 5 seconds delay, and then I throw an exception. So you found exactly the other one that I really hate, Monopoly. And in fact, I can search for it again, and 5 seconds, and we will see that search failed. Monopoly is not supported and intentionally fails as a demo use case, because yes, it's exactly one of the games that I decided to put in jail just to stay into the Monopoly. Okay, we have this application. We will see the result at the end of the session. But, well, we saw that we have performed some operations. Some of them failed. And, of course, the system has generated some logs. Let's get back to the slides, because, well, it usually takes a couple of minutes for application insight to visualize the logs, to show the logs that are generated. So I prefer to use the slides, to use PowerPoint to show you what I wanted to show. The first thing is that, okay, now that we have the logs, we can use KQL as a language in Application Insight to perform queries on it. I mentioned log levels, and for some reason, I don't know why, in Application Insight, they are called severity levels. And severity levels equal to 3 means that it's an error. I don't know why we have numbers rather than strings. Maybe, well, it's a matter of performance, I think. But, well, we have the possibility to filter for specific log levels. And this is the very first important thing to do. But that's not enough, of course, because, as I mentioned, we should not concatenate in the message string also the exception message, the exception stack trace, and type, because we can use something that is way more interesting in Application Insights, which is the exceptions table. And I know that this is not that famous as compared as the traces table, but it's incredibly useful and important, because here you can find all the details of all the exceptions that you have logged. And when I mean all the details, I mean that when you open a single element, you can have a lot of information. Here, there's too much. But let's see something.
But I have access to this if I am using the overload that you mentioned, that we are passing the exception as a separate parameter, like as the first parameter, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's okay. You have to pass in the instance of the exception for it to be populated on Application Insight. And for every exception in the list, we can see a lot of stuff that is interesting, like, well, the type of the exception, or the assembly that threw the exception, or directly the method. So you can query for the class and the method. One thing that I don't like is that, given that this search async method is asynchronous, there is the whole state machine in .NET, and therefore the real method is not search async, but it's move next. So, okay, the method is actually move next, but still you can identify the name of the method that threw the exception, and also have the name, have the exception message, and you have it here as the outer message. But that's not enough. Another really interesting part for me is that you have access to the whole stack trace, even directly the line that threw the exception. And this is important because we tend to focus on, okay, there is an exception, I want to learn about that specific one. And it's a good approach. But there is something else that we can do and that we should do. When we have a complex application with different assemblies, it could be interesting to identify which is the assembly that throws more exception. And most probably this is the assembly that is maybe weaker on some parts that we should work more on. So instead of just identifying, okay, there is this exception that is caused by some specific reason, we can switch the mentality and say, okay, which is the assembly in our system that throws more exception? Because most probably there is something rotting there. And it's a good starting point to stabilize our application. Lastly, I mentioned that message format is important. And this is actually one of the properties that we have in our exceptions table. So we have the original format of the message, of the log, that is associated to the exception. So we have a lot of information here just because we have proper log messages, so using the message template, and we were using the right overload of the log exception method, log error method. So, well, we finally have good logs. And it's time to create alerts to use these logs to say, to check, okay, there is something that is going on here. I want to be notified on this. And those are the so-called alerts that exist in Azure. Alerts are available in, well, almost every Azure resource. You can identify them under the monitoring part here for, in the Azure dashboard under alerts. And here you will find all the alerts that were raised in a specific amount of time. So of course you can filter by the time range. Let's see the detail of one of them before learning how to create. Whenever you click on a specific item, you can find a lot of information, like when it was fired, what is the resource that is affected by this alert, but not only. This part here is incredibly interesting. You have the timeline that shows you the amount of occurrences of this alert in a specific time range. And this can teach you a lot. Is the alert something that, okay, just happened today and a couple of months ago? Or is it something that it keeps happening every 5 minutes, therefore we have to do something? This is interesting for your investigations. And then, did somebody already took care of this alert? So, along with the information of the alert itself, we can store if somebody is already taking care of it. And this is important because it focuses, it gives you the possibility, which actually should be mandatory in my opinion, to define the ownership of alerts. So who is the owner of managing this specific alert? And it's something that you might want to define upfront in your team. So if an alert is raised, who is in charge of it? Is it always the same person? Or maybe the first person who can look at it takes care of it, and therefore you can just say, okay, Davide, I'm taking care of this specific alert, I'm working on it, stay calm with the rest of the team, and don't worry, I'll be taking care.
But
So,
this user
ownership.
response, Davide, this user response that we are adding in here or editing, is it just like a message that will be like attached to this type of alerts? And then everyone in the team could see like, is there any investigation going on, or what was the reason for this alert, and who is taking care of that? Or is there like any automation behind that?
This is just the sort of flag that say okay, Davide is in charge of it. So
Okay.
it does not add additional information on it. It just says, okay, for this specific occurrence of the alert, Davide is working on it, or we can ignore it and we are good.
Okay.
One last thing that is nice to have when an error occurs is that, okay, here in this screenshot, it's still marked still as a preview, but it's actually available for everybody. The observability agent. It means that for every instance of the alert, we have the observability agent, so an AI helper that understands what is the cause of the exception, looks at all the Azure resources, and helps you investigate what caused the exception, the alert to be fired. And this is already with all the context about this specific instance of the alert. So you just click it and you have an AI tool that is helping you investigate on this specific instance, looking at all Azure resources, looking at the metrics, looking at the logs, and it's good. It's really helpful. And let's take this in mind because we will meet this guy later. Okay, now that we know what we can do once an alert is fired, let's see how to create one, because of course it can be, useful. Well, first of all, once you decide to create an alert, you have to specify its scope. Is it working on the whole subscription, maybe on a specific resource, or on a whole resource group? You have to specify the scope. And then you can configure how you want to raise alerts. In this example, and saying that, okay, Azure, look at all the exceptions that are thrown in this resource. So I'm using the exceptions as a signal for querying, for performing querying. Then group the exceptions, count, so perform a simple addition of the elements, and then look at the threshold. If there is more than one, well, at least one exception in this time range, in this time span, then fire the alarm. Okay, what is this time span? So it's not, of course, something that is generic. You have to specify it. So check every minute in this case, and look back in time for 1 minute. So it means that every single minute it performs the query and looks if there is at least one exception, and in this case, fire the alert.
And
But
this
that's
is this is using the application insight, like the exceptions that you showed us, for example. This is the
yep,
signal name that you chose at the top, right?
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But you can do something cool if you have
Mhm.
proper logs, of course. Whenever you have a good query for you that you know that is relevant for your application, like in this case, I have all the logs and I filter, okay, all my logs, look for the logs that are error, so severity level equal to 3, and the message contains risiko. Well, in this case, you can say, create a new alert rule, and this allows you to have this specific query as a signal. So it's not just the custom stuff the out of the box stuff that comes with Azure, but you can create your own queries as a source of proof, as a source of for checking if something is happening. And then therefore you can aggregate and you can count if there is at least one exception. If there is, in this case, if there is at least one log item that is an error and contains the string risiko, then fire the alert. So again, this happens if you have good logs. And of course, if your queries are slow, how can it happen? The alerts won't be that reactive. If it takes 5 minutes to run a query, how can it react promptly? This is why it is really important to properly architect your logs, even if they look like something trivial or something that we should not really care about. Okay, now we have the alert that fires an event, but we have to do something with that event. And this is why we have alert rules. Sorry, action groups.
Actions.
An action group is a group of action, of course. And what you can do? Well, we have some possibilities that are like sending a notification, like a prepared email or an SMS message to a specific number, or a push notification to your application. And this is already out of the box. But we can have something, I wouldn't say better, but different. We can, for example, say, okay, if an alert is raised, then call an Azure function, or send a message in Event Hub, or maybe call a logic app, or send a message to a webbook, so call a webbook. So you have a lot of possibilities on how you can react to an alert. For this session, I will show you what you can do with a logic app. Lastly, again, intentionality. Once you create an alert, it's really important to set the correct severity. Because again, if everything is always an error, nobody will ever look at the alerts. They will just say, oh, okay, it's always the same stuff, we can ignore it. And well, you know what happens in this kind of situation. So it's important to set the right error, because maybe not everything is so urgent that requires immediate response. Again, it's a sort of ownership. Now we have this. We have defined what we can have with the alerts and the action group. So just to recap, now we have good logs. Now we have the alerts that look at our logs, and in case they raise an event and call a logic app. And right now it's everything pretty easy. What is this logic app? What can we do with this logic app? And this is where things get really interesting. First of all, it's important to notice that a logic app in this case receives an HTTP request. And if we look at the HTTP request content at the payload, we can see, of course, a lot of stuff that we can skip right now, but we can look at a couple of things that are pretty interesting. First of all, we know the name of the alert. Therefore, we know the reason it was raised. We know the resource group that contains that alert. So we know what happened and we know where. And we have the investigation link. We have the link to the observability agent that allows us to directly start investigating on what happened. And it's already here as a property. This means that once we have this kind of information, we can do a lot of stuff and all the messages that we want, like sending an email using the Outlook connector. And it's fine. We have the subject, we have the body, we can do, sending an email, nothing fancy. But, for example, we can send a message in Slack, which is fine. But we have a problem here. This Slack connector only allows you to send a text message, which again is fine, but the result is not really that appalling. I mean, the result is something like this. It's nice. It's a plain text, nothing fancy. But wouldn't it be better to have something maybe more I would say something more useful, for sure, more appealing, and was structured maybe with an image, with a table, with links, with a header and subheaders and stuff like that? Yes. And we can do it by not, it's a contradiction, by not relying on the Slack connector, but by sending an HTTP call to the Slack APIs. And once you have your authentication token, you have the endpoint that is always the same, you can send a JSON body that, okay, once you see it, you'd be like, okay, what is all this part here? Why sending a JSON body? Because it allows you to create something nicer like this, where you have, emojis. Okay, emojis are nice. You have a title, you have a table with headers and markdown text, and maybe you can have buttons or images or videos. And how you can do that? By using the so-called block kit builder. which is an editor provided by Slack that allows you to create the component to, well, create the structure of your Slack messages by using all the different parts, like, again, the emoji, or maybe bold text, or maybe the image, or a button, etc. And the result is a JSON string, is a JSON content. And therefore, you can just copy this content here, send it via HTTP, and you will receive a message like this, so in which you only define the structure of the message, and the rendering is all up to Slack. So it depends on your device, it depends on the screen resolution and stuff like that. You really don't have to care. You just care of creating the message as you need. And for Microsoft Teams, well, we have something almost identical, let's say, and it's called adaptive cards, in which, again, you have this nice editor. You have all the different parts that you might want to add, like, I don't know, the media, a badge, a code block, or a table, and you can find everything here. And once you drag and drop the elements in the editor, you can see the JSON payload for the adaptive card, and again, send it using the right connector. So again, it's always a matter of identifying what is good for you, what is working the best, what is more effective in case of an emergency. And again, this is all agnostic of the destination device. So it could be your Teams on Windows, it could be your mobile app, and it's just the definition of the message. So to recap what we saw till now. Now we have good logs. Now we have the Azure Alerts that looks at the logs and fires something. We have the action group that performs some operations like calling a logic app. We have the logic app that says, okay, something has happened. Let me send a message in Slack, in Teams. Let me send an email. We need the last part of the puzzle. We need to have the single place in which we can find all the queries and have a glimpse of everything that happened in the system. And these are the so-called Azure Workbook. And well, for this, we will see directly in, okay, directly here in Azure. Because a workbook is a huge dashboard with the queries rendered in a fancy manner. And we have a lot of stuff going on here. And you can, of course, customize it as you want. You might want to use something that is already out of the box, but you can just define stuff as you really need. This is an example of a dashboard that I created for this kind of session, in which I can, for example, hit edit and say, okay, I can add a couple of things here. Yes, I don't know if you can see them.
Yeah,
like,
the context menu, you mean?
Yeah, this one here.
Yes, yeah.
Perfect. For example, we can add a query. Okay, good, a query. And here comes an important part, an interesting part that I kind of liked, and that you can create a dashboard not only based on application insight. Yes, of course, you can paste here the logs, but you can look, for example, at data on Azure Data Explorer, or from a JSON, or show something that comes from a custom endpoint, or maybe from Prometheus. Maybe you don't even have application insight. You are using the Grafana and the Prometheus stack, and you might want to query a Prometheus endpoint. And this is pretty interesting because you are in the end detaching application insights and the workbook. So it means that whichever kind of source you might want to have, and that can be useful in case of an emergency, you can just query that endpoint, query that resource and see what happens. Then, for example, let's have a look at something that is already here, like this part here, which is, okay, kind of empty, I know. But it's a query on the exceptions table. And here I said, okay, summarize count by type means group by count, group by type and count the occurrences. And I can define that the kind of visualization can change. So for example, here is a pie chart, but maybe I want a bar chart. Maybe I think that a time chart is better. No, it's never better in this kind of question, but well, you know, you got the point. Or maybe the grid, whatever you need, whatever you think is best for you, you can actually do it. And in the advanced editor, we find something that goes behind the scene. So this module here is actually a JSON. Why is it important? Because as a JSON, it means that you can just copy it and paste it in your, I don't know, on in your wiki or somewhere, so that every time you need, you already have the whole component ready for you. You can just copy and paste it here.
This is representing the whole workbook or just the one item that we are creating in it?
In this case, it's just this specific item. We will see later how to export the whole workbook.
Okay.
And one last thing is that, yeah, right. Clearly, you can, okay, this one here. For the out-of-the-box matrix, like calls from to external systems, or you know, the stuff that comes with Azure, so not the specific queries that we saw. It's nice, this part here, that allows you to correlate the time of it, of the exceptions, of the occurrences of events. So in this case, I saw that I had 13 calls to the Board Game Geek APIs, and in fact, it logged this amount of duration of the HTTP requests. So, you know, it's nice to have correlation between modules in this demo, in this dashboard. And there is a nice thing that I really like, and that really can save you a lot of time, which is this part here. So it's okay, this part here. And you can say, okay, these are the classic Azure chips that allows me to, you know, select a value and change the visualization. Yes, but those values are up to you. It means that you can create those so-called parameters. And for example, and you can define, well, of course, the name and the parameter type. For example, you can create parameters that are like plain text, so a text box, or maybe a dropdown whose values come from an external resource, like your logs. So if you are proper logs, if you have structured message templates, you can use the result of your queries to create a dropdown that allows you to filter the results of all the other queries in your dashboard. If I want to search for everything that happened related to the keyword Risico, I can do it because I have proper logs. And again, I cannot stress enough on this part. But you can, for example, well, classic time range, or selecting, I don't know, multi-value or a subscription or an Azure resource. You can do a lot of stuff. And of course, once you have defined the name of the parameter, you can use it in your other queries. You see, here we have the my custom time range, which is a time range picker. And if I look at the details here, it's the exception, summarized count, okay. But have a look at this one, at this guy. we have the time range and its value is exactly the property named my custom time range. So whenever I change my property that I decided with my rules, that change affects the rendering of all the other elements in the dashboard. And well, this is a time saver that it's incredibly useful.
One
And then
question.
to conclude with this part of the Azure Workbook, well, first of all, there are actually a couple of things that I wanted to show. The first one is pretty easy. So maybe you don't want anybody to open this workbook and have the possibility to edit and make changes. Maybe you want just to send a read-only view and you have the specific link that allows you to do it. Or the really last thing on Azure Workbook is that you can export them and you can actually import them also as a plain JSON or as an ARM template. And this is really useful if you are using a lot of Azure resources that are almost identical one to each other. Like, I don't know, I have the North America, I have the Italy server, I have the Spain, I have Northern Europe, etc. Whenever I deploy the new version of the application, it means that during the deployment phase, if I, of course, I'm using IRM templates, it means that the new Azure Workbook with the new queries become available to everybody. They are part of the deployment phase. And again, this is nice.
I have one question because I see that. Do you hear me, Davide?
Yeah, I do.
Sorry. Because I see that, for example, you mentioned the data source could be a Prometheus, right? Which means like there are like metrics and things that are exposed there. And also in one of the screens that you were showing how to build a query, there were like traces. So I
Mm-hmm.
assume like of course, we talked about like how to do proper logging, but I think the whole alerting and notifications and these dashboards goes even more beyond the logs, right? It's about
Yeah,
more the observability that you want to get over your system and how it
exactly.
behaves. Okay.
Yeah, they all come together. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
uh, if
Yeah.
observability is enough for you to well get notified of something that is going wrong, maybe just Prometheus, Grafana, or whatever you want for observability is fine.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that maybe not every company can afford to introduce observability in a legacy system.
Yeah.
And I saw a lot of places in which adding observability is not that easy because it means
Mm-hmm.
adding new dependencies and handling a new amount of data to store and compliance and a lot of stuff is not always that easy. In these cases, if you cannot and you can just rely on old-fashioned logs,
Mm-hmm.
well, you can do a mix of them and use the observability provided by Azure, so the dummy stuff like exceptions, the HTTP request time, etc., and your own logs.
Mm-hmm.
So you can mix and
Yeah.
match whatever.
Yeah. Definitely.
All right, I was forgetting the most important part. Remember before that we searched for Monopoly and we searched for Risico,
Mm-hmm.
and for it was taking 5 seconds and then raising an exception. But then we had the alert that was looking at the exception and calling the logic up, and then and so the whole thing that we discussed today. Well, we have the result, and we have some real notifications on
Mm-hmm.
Slack that contain all the important parts that you might want. You can add clickable links to application insight, to the Azure Workbook that we just saw, so that
Mm-hmm.
you can click it and have directly the reference to what happened in that specific moment, and the investigation link. The investigation link is really useful, so that right now an alert was fired, I can click it and I can go to Azure, who already has all the context of the alert, and say, hey, ciao, I'm the observability agent. Do you want me to look at it? Yes, start investigation. And now it looks at everything that happened, all the resources, all the alerts, all the logs, and whatever you need. Well,
But
for
everything
now, I
is
can just
connected to that to that exact exception or that exact scenario, like in the
exactly,
context of this AI agent.
exactly.
Hmm.
Yep. Uh, so well, this was built using block built block. I don't remember. Or I already forgotten the name. But the part that we saw with the JSON structure that
Yeah.
ran us on Slack.
Okay.
So we are at the end of our trip. We saw how to create proper logs with all the rules that we saw. So correct log level and passing the exception and using message template rather than string concatenation. Then we set up the alert rules uh, based on different sources, maybe on the exception, maybe on the duration of an HTTP request. Why not? Maybe it's taking too much, then I want to get notified of it and raise an alert. We saw how to react. So I don't know, send an SMS, maybe call an external endpoint. We saw how to create a custom action, like in the Azure Logic app, how to um, send a message on Slack, on Teams, or send maybe an email. Then we saw how to create a useful message for us so that it's not just, hey, something has happened. Now it's up to you. No, I already give you all the information that can kickstart your investigation. And finally, workbooks. So, okay, something is happening. I need a clear view of everything that is happening in my system. Everything is here and everything can be automated during the release. So, well, the plan went well. I still had to spend my vacation days refreshing the application, but at least we took it as an occasion for reworking how we manage the emergencies. And well, thanks for your attention. You can find in this QR code additional resources that I collected about the topics I discussed right now in this session. You can find me on my blog codeforit.dev or LinkedIn, and don't forget to tell me which is your favorite board game.
Well, yeah, you already told us your favorite board game, right?
It's difficult. I think that right now one of the new entries in my list has become one of my favorites, and it's Castle Combo. This one is pretty nice. It's really pretty nice. Easy but very fun.
Cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
I suggest you this one here is nice. Maybe next time we will meet in person, I can bring it with me
Definitely.
and we can try it again.
Looking forward to it. Good. If there's any questions from the audience, feel free to put it in the chats. And if not, wish everyone a very nice evening, morning, I don't know, afternoon, wherever you are in this blue planet. Okay. Seems that we are good. Thanks, Davide, again for joining to our community and having this interesting talk about how to gain proper alerts and notifications and insight into your system by proper logging. Great.
Yeah, it was a pleasure being here. So thanks again for inviting me.
You're welcome. Our pleasure as well. Have a nice evening, everyone. Bye.
Ciao.